Good morning, everyone. My name is Faz Sayed. I am the founder and CEO of Noyobi. I'm an enterprise and leadership agility coach. I work with leaders in businesses, helping them transform through their transformation journey. Follow me on Instagram and LinkedIn at Noyobi, Noyobe. I am so excited to have Christy Ollinger join me today. I met Christy over Instagram, and what a beautiful platform. And I've seen Christy do her magic through her posts and reels and all kinds of other communication mechanisms, and I'm a big fan. Christy, thank you for joining. To get things started, would you kindly introduce yourself?
I would love that. And Fez, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited. And I can already see that some friends have joined us. So I see some West Coast friends. I see friends from my immediate community. So thank you. Thank you all for being here on this Sunday. My name is Christy Ollinger. I am a product manager, and I've been working in banking for 20 years, which sounds super boring when I say it out loud, but I work in the credit card business, which is the most interesting banking product out there. A lot of cool things happen with credit cards. But when I got into the product manager role as a credit card product manager, about halfway into my career, I really struggled with how to communicate what I wanted to do. So how to tell the story of my product, how to tell the story of the changes that I was looking to make. And it really surprised me because by that point, I had already won a national speaking competition and was already teaching workshops on communication and networking. In the meantime, in my day job, I'm really struggling with how to do this. And so I was looking for resources to help me, and everything off the shelf from HR was kind of generic and not very helpful. And I wasn't at a level where someone was going to hire a one-on-one coach to help me with communication. And my boss didn't really have time to walk me through it either. So I had to learn on the job, which took a long time. And I think that's how most people learn these soft skills, is just trial and error and learning it on the job. But a few years ago, I realized that I was in a position where I'd learned some things and I could help others who may be in the same position that I was. Plus, I love communicating. I love delivering workshops. I love talking with interesting people. So I decided that I was going to start, doing this more regularly, doing workshops. I started an Instagram, ko.communication, which has been such a joy in meeting people like you. And I just think it's a really fun platform for learning. And so it's been, really rewarding to just share what I know in the hopes that someone can pick up, a tip or two that helps them get there faster. So that's kind of my story.
That's wonderful. We're going to obviously talk through some more as we go. Now I'm nervous because I'm talking to somebody who is like this communication expert. And when I look at your post, you're like, you shouldn't say, I think, you shouldn't do this. And I'm like, okay, now I have to monitor my words. No, I'm just kidding. But
no,
I'm just so interested in learning about that.
It's a really important point, because one of the things that I want people to know is that you are much more relatable when you do say or use filler words. I just said right? So if you're a robot of delivering things so perfectly, you're completely unapproachable and nobody can relate to you. So there is a human element that when you can be yourself, and that includes making mistakes, then people like you more. So it's not a bad thing. There's no policing over here, no judgment.
Thank you. I feel better. So those of us, the attendees who have joined us, really welcome. Thank you so much. Like Christy said, some of you are in Menlo Park, California. It's super early over there. So this is commitment, really, really. And that's true friendship and followership. So really appreciate that. There are a few friends of mine on the call. And what we wanted to encourage you to do is, Christy and I, keep this an interactive session. We want you to share any notes, any thoughts, any questions in chat and a Q&A. We would love some interaction, and Christy might even have an exercise that she wants us to do. So we might actually do that as well. So please keep this interactive. This is your session. If somebody really has an urge to talk, raise your hand and I'll I apparently have a lot of power and I can give you guys the ability to talk. So I'll just unmute you and we'll love to hear from you as well. So all joking aside, really, really appreciate you being here. So Christy, the first thing I wanted to ask you was product manager role. So, and having been working in this industry for a while, I know how important communication is in that role. So let's just get things started there. So as you have been working in this role, what does product manager role mean to you?
So for me, being the product manager means that you are the caretaker of the product. And that includes the vision, the profitability, the customer experience, everything end to end. And so for me, the tie-in with communication is you have to be able to tell the story of the product to everyone in your organization. And that includes the most senior executives, and that includes the people who are selling the product, that includes the dev team that's doing the work. Like, you have to be able to meet people where they are and talk about the product in a way that's going to resonate with them based on who they are. So that's why, that's sort of the intersection for me between being a product manager and how communication plays such a huge factor, is that you have to communicate differently depending on who you're speaking with. And that's a really advanced communication skill.
Yeah. When it comes to communication, what's the most challenging part of the product manager role? Where do you feel like product manager has to really like feel challenged, as far as communication?
So for me, when I'm thinking about a change that I want to make with my product, there is a lot that goes into that decision. There's going to be customer research. There's going to be analytics, internal analytics. There's going to be financial business cases. There's going to be the customer experience. There's all of these inputs that weigh into what ends up being the ultimate recommendation, not to mention the enterprise strategic vision and how it sort of ladders up to that. So for me, the toughest part, and I think for product managers in general, the toughest part is how do you distill that information to be able to share it in a simple way so that it makes sense? I mean, I could literally have 50 pages to talk about a single decision. And so I like to give the example. Several years ago, I was involved in developing a new cashback product for Bank of America. And that was an initiative that took us 18 months of research to come to a decision about what we were going to build. Multiple research projects, tons of analytics, like just unbelievable amounts of effort to come to, okay, this is what we're going to build. When we went to the enterprise forum to get it approved, we had less than 10 slides to tell that story. And many of them were already predetermined for us, like slides to like give risk ratings and things like that. So we really only had like 6 slides to tell the story of why this was the right product in the right moment, and people should approve a really big investment for it. So being able to take something super complex, figure out what is the most important element of that, and then distill it and say it in a way that's going to make sense to someone who's not as close to it as you are, is super. I mean, it's really, really hard. It's why I really struggled with it, because it's a tough job.
Yeah, no, that's for sure. I was reflecting, and in this morning I was trying to figure out how many types of communications are out there these days, right? So we have the emails, we have the verb. Obviously, day to day we have the verbal communications, we have presentations, we have Instagram, we have LinkedIn, we have videos that we make on Instagram and things like that. And frankly, as I've gotten to do more of the social media, I've realized how challenging it is for people like me to get out of our comfort zone to start like getting in front of the videos and looking at yourself. And I just learn a lot from those kind of folks. What do you think that all these different communication channels, which one is like I guess you would find, or the people that you talk to find most challenging?
I believe the one I get the most questions on is presentations, but also extemporaneous speaking. So needing to speak up in meetings off the cuff, and how can you prepare or, be better with that? I think that's the one that gives people the most, nervousness and maybe lack of confidence in their abilities. But I do think that there's a lot of improvement to be had in email, for example, and how we communicate with each other in email. And I think when we think about the number of types of communication channels, the other really important point, and I thought where you were going with this, is how do you decide which channel is the right channel to use for your message? And that one is really tough to answer because it's super situational, right? I think all of communication really is like, you have to assess, who you are, who you're engaging with, what their preferences are, what the nature of the communication is, and, and make a decision from there. And so that's another area where it takes practice, it takes paying attention to what's working, and then figuring out what is going to work in that situation. So
yeah. So, there are friends and family members and who are also in similar businesses and, coaching and things like that. And we always talk about learning or trying to understand who the person is you're talking to, or who is the end user that you're communicating to. Could you talk a little bit about that? Because in your world, that's so important.
Yes.
How do you make sure your message relates to them, right? So,
Okay. So I'm going to give an unpopular answer to this. And I change the way I talk about it because I know what people's reactions are. It's building relationships, which is also known as networking. I don't like to say networking because then people are like, but really it like to understand how you should talk to someone to influence them, you have to get to know them. Like that is the only way to be able to influence them. But it's more than that. And this has to do with the exercise that I want to do. So let's see if we can wake up the people that are with us. So if you're with us, can you just type a yes in the chat so that I know that you're still watching? So give me like a yes in the chat. Yes. All right. Nils is with us. And he's already asked a question, of course, because he's an overachiever. Okay. Yes. Okay, you guys are with us. All right. Okay, so we're going to do an exercise, and it's a tiny bit awkward, but I've done this virtually and it works, and it's just as awkward when I do it in person. So here's what I want to ask you. Does everyone on this line, do you know the song Twinkle Twinkle Little Star? So type the word star if you know the word Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. Yeah, you know that that song. Okay, great. Okay, so we're going to do an exercise where we're going to be in silence, and what I'm going to ask you to do is, in your head, I want you to sing the song Twinkle Twinkle Little Star just in your head. And you can close your eyes, but you don't have to close your eyes. And so sing it in your head. If you get to the end, just start it over again. Okay, so we're going to do this. We're going to start right now. Okay, stop. Okay, now in the chat, tell me, how long do you think that was? How long do you think we were sitting in silence singing Twinkle Twinkle Little Star? Give me a time estimate. 2 minutes, 15 seconds. Whoa, 1 minute, 15 seconds, 40 seconds, 20 seconds. So look at how wide that was. Now, there's only one true answer, and I know the answer. It was 33 seconds, right? But here we are all in the same space and the same moment, and yet we have very different perspectives of reality. So this is a really, really important point, that even when you're in the same meeting, your experience and understanding of what's happening is going to be different from the people around you. Now, this is an exercise that Sean Aker describes in his book, The Happiness Advantage. So if you haven't read that book, I would definitely go and check it out. But the exercise is so amazing to me. I mean, look at that. The first two answers, what was it, 2 minutes and 15 seconds?
2 minutes, 15 seconds. Yeah.
Polar opposites. And it just goes to show you that like reality, your reality is really through the filter of your experiences, and it's the same for everyone else. So a big part of what the challenges with communication is just not understanding what other people's perception of reality is.
Yeah. Those of you who said 15 seconds and 20 seconds, someday I would like to hear you sing Twinkle Twinkle, because that's like, how many times have you done that in the last 30 seconds? So that was 33 seconds? Did you
33 seconds.
Time that?
Yeah.
Oh wow. Well, maybe that is not, yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. That was a really good exercise. So there's a question. What are the top mistakes people make when communicating?
Well, so I mean, I think that exercise is sort of the first one. They forget that the communication is not about your idea. It's about what that person is going to, and what that person will perceive about the idea. So knowing your audience and speaking to that, speaking for them, right? So when you speak, it's not about you, it's not about your idea. It's about being sure that you're getting the message across and being sure that it lands and is well received on the other side. So that is the number one thing. Well, I mean, making it simple as well. But so some examples of that. If you work frequently with, let's say, tech developers, engineers, and those kinds of things, and let's say there's terminology that is, very common in your interactions. You're talking about Jira tickets, you're talking about, stories and epics or whatever technical terms, and you go to present to a senior executive group about, I don't know, why you should prioritize the tech debt over the feature that you want to build or whatever it is. Like, I mean, I would hope a senior executive understands what tech debt is, but you might need to describe it in another way so that it makes sense to them. You might need to describe it in a way. And so instead of using the words tech debt, which means something very specific, you might be able to say, hey, we've got some applications that are on a system that's declining and needs to be upgraded so that we can, be able to do everything that we want to do in the future. So that's a really good example where, of course, like tech debt is like such a part of your vocabulary when you're, having those interactions. Yeah. But someone who doesn't interact that way every day, it can be a challenge. And then they're sitting there thinking, wait, what is tech debt again? While you're continuing to explain, and then they're behind. So making sure that you're not using acronyms and jargon, and that you're meeting people where they are, and you're talking about the things that are important to them. So for example, when I go and talk with a finance partner, you better believe that the first thing that I'm going to be telling them about is how this change will improve the P&L. Like that is going to be the primary, points that I'm making are going to be around profitability. But when I'm talking to marketing, I'm going to be talking about, oh, look how well this fits in with our brand strategy, and how cool you could make this in terms of the social media engagement you're going to do or whatever it is. So speaking to people about the things that they care about and in the words that they know is a pretty big one.
That makes sense. As you were talking about it, for me, I'm just relating to this personally. Sometimes when I'm talking about something, I almost do too much background setting, too much context setting. It's almost like I feel I'm worried that I'm losing people in the context. Yes. So that's another balancing act.
So I love this. So I have this course called Consensus Creator. And one of the lessons is called Distilling Information. And that's about how do you figure out the right information to include in the story so that it works. Honestly, it's the Pareto principle, right? 20% of the elements of the story drive 80% of the story. So for the most part, people
Hmm.
don't need to know all the detail. You need to know it. And if they're interested and they ask you, you need to be able to share it. But generally speaking, you can paint the picture by just sharing the 20% of information that is the primary driver of the decision.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Christine is asking, how do you figure out the words they know? Does that just come with time and experience?
Well, I think the biggest thing is you don't assume that they know anything, right? So you really you dumb it down to like, so that, I mean, if my second grader can't understand it, then it's not, it's not dumb enough. But I do
That's
think,
a good point.
yeah, but I do think there are ways, and one of the things that I think is really important, not just especially in this virtual world, but just in general, is as you're talking, check in with people to make sure that they're following. And so, we have this tendency to just sort of, we're nervous and we just sort of blurt out everything that we want to say. It's important to pause after any like primary idea and say, ask like, hey, is the way I'm describing that making sense? Like, are you tracking with what we're talking about here? Because that can, you need to create space for people to ask questions and the expectation that they could have questions about what you're saying. Because what you don't want to do is get all the way through to the end and realize that they had a question on the very first thing that you said, right? And so part of this comes to company culture. I am very much like the person that will always ask the question. Like I interrupt people a lot and say, hey, like, what does that mean? Like, I'm not familiar with that term. Like I do that all the time, but you have to know that most people don't, because people don't want to look dumb, so you kind of have to create the expectation that there might be questions and kind of create space for them to do that in a way that's comfortable to them. That's kind of my.
Yeah, I think that's really a good point. You also said something in there that also is one of the posts. The first post that I basically have written it in my top few lessons that I've learned over the life, and that was one of those. You just said, does this make sense? Or you actually said, the way I'm speaking, is that making sense? And there was a post you said, when you are saying something to people, do you really want, when you say, does that make sense, almost puts them at a little bit of a disadvantage to be genuine and honest in answering that question.
This one was really, so this one was really triggering. So the idea here, and you probably hear this a lot if you're in a corporate or business setting, but people will often say, does that make sense? It's like, after they say anything, does that make sense? Does that make sense? And if their intention is to confirm understanding, it's not a great question to ask, especially in like a meeting setting. If it's one-on-one and you're teaching someone something, sure, ask, does that make sense? That's a perfect dynamic, right? You're sharing like individual information. But if you're sharing an idea in a meeting and you ask, does that make sense? People are not likely to be like, yeah, no, that doesn't make sense at all. Like, I'm completely lost. Like, people don't want to look dumb. People assume that everybody else knows and they don't know. It's part of imposter syndrome. It's part of, this thing that happens. And so what I like to do is flip it a little bit and say, is the way I'm describing that making sense? Or I'll say something like, are you tracking with what I'm saying? Right. So the idea is not like, are you smart enough to keep up with what I'm saying? It's more like, hey, are we on the same page with like the basics? Not necessarily do you agree with me, but do you understand what I'm saying? And so I try to kind of switch up how I say it to evoke that response, and an opportunity for people to say, yeah, it's not really making sense to me. Can you say it in a different way?
Yeah.
So I do,
cool.
And it was so interesting because I got a lot of pushback from females saying that they felt that it made me look weak. The fact that I said, hey,
Yeah.
is the way I'm saying this making sense made me somehow look weaker. And I completely disagree. I think you should be able to have that kind of interaction at work, right? Like we should be able to, be vulnerable and know that you can't know everything. And so you have to just make sure people are on the same page. Thanks, Sophia.
Yeah.
I appreciate that little
Yeah.
check-in. So yeah.
Do you have good questions to ask the audience that they will respond usefully to?
Ooh, I always have good questions to ask the audience. Well, so look, we build this as a how to build influence, right? So that it was like, hey, how do you create influence? So I guess I would ask, what do we think are the barriers to influencing others at work? Like, do you guys think there's a specific what problems do you face in trying to convince other people of something? Is it all about hierarchy in your organization, or is there another barrier that you feel is limiting you to be able to influence other? Oh, that I'm totally missed that. Do you have good questions that we respond usefully to? What does that mean, Nils? Can you tell me more about what that question
I am also trying to understand that.
Do you have good questions to ask the audience that they will? Oh, in context of what we were just saying. Okay, never mind. Back up.
Okay.
See, that just goes to show.
I may have misunderstood too.
No,
I just
yeah.
want to
So
talk it out
basically,
loud.
like, what questions can you ask in a meeting? Am I getting it right, Nils? Give me like a thumbs up or a thumbs down or a yes or a no. Or you can come off mute if you'd like to come on the line. But I think the question is, what can you ask the audience that they will respond usefully to? So I think that's going to depend on the purpose of what you're communicating. Oh, here it comes. Oh, I like his little visual. That's great.
I am not going to try pronouncing your name because I think I'm going to mispronounce it.
Oh, Nils?
Is it Niles?
Nils.
Okay, Nils.
Yes, he is like an OG of product management. So if you don't know Nils and you're not following him on LinkedIn, go hit him up as well. He's got a great podcast called The Secrets of Product Management. So
yeah, in fact, I think he has a boot camp coming up. If I'm not mistaken.
That's right. Hey, Nils, can you
Okay.
come off mute? Are you able to come off mute and just elaborate on your question? There might be a setting.
Yeah, I did ask him to unmute himself. Okay, we'll just wait for him.
Okay.
In the meantime, anybody else has any questions? Okay, so.
Oh, there's a good question. So customarily they leave Q&A to the end and then it seems like it's too late. So I do feel like, well, so it's interesting, Sophia, because I feel like it really depends on the audience and the dynamic. Again, back to communication being very much situational. There are some times with specific personalities that if you give them an inch, they will take over your meeting. So you're trying to present this idea and they have their own soapbox things that they want to resolve. And so you give them that wiggle room to ask and speak in the meeting. And then all of a sudden you've lost it. So I do think it's a balance, and you have to know the personalities in the room and whether or not you can pull the conversation back to get to the rest of what you need to talk to. So again, another advanced communication skill that you really need to sort of assess the current situation and personalities to figure out how to make sure that, especially if it's like complex and they need to get the first concept in order to introduce the next one, you've got to find the right way to do that and test what works for you. It can be hard to rein people back in once they get on their soapbox item. Ooh, okay, I love this one. Influencing without authority. So the ability to influence, any tips on how to do that effectively? So unless you're the CEO or founder of your organization, you will always, and even when you will always need to influence people without having authority over them. So when you think about it, in order to get something done, you probably need other people's help. There are very few things that we can just do on our own without anyone helping us. And people have varying degrees of motivation to do that. So sometimes you have good goal alignment with your partners that are in cross-functional areas, and it makes it easy to execute things. Sometimes people have their own agendas, and it's hard to get them to do what you want them to do because they have their own thing that they're doing. I go back to that thing that nobody likes to think about, which is you've got to build relationships with those people. The only way to have any influence is to know more about what that person's interests are and to help them get what they're looking to get. So Zig Ziglar is one of my favorite motivational people of all time. And he had a quote that he used to say all the time, which is, you can get everything in life that you want if you just help enough other people get what they want. So if you go in with that methodology to say, hey, like not what's in it for me, but more like, what is this person contesting with? And is there something that I can do to help them? It becomes this ecosystem where ultimately people find ways to help you when they can. So you build this sort of network of relationships in your organization. And the thing is, it takes time. I always say you need to be spending at least 4 hours a week doing one-on-one relationship building with the people in your organization. And nobody wants to hear that. And nobody wants to do that because they feel like they have to be doing the work. Like if they're spending time just one-on-one with people, just like chatting about what's going on in the organization, that's not real work. But the irony is that if you spend more time building relationship, the work becomes easier because people want to help you because they know you, like meeting and building a relationship is really just about people help the people that they know and like and trust. And so you build that trust by having that relationship. So for me, influencing without authority means that you're able to, create a world where people want to help you do what you want to do because they know and like you.
Kazim has a question. How do you get over nervousness when doing presentations?
Ooh, I love this. So the first thing, being nervous is a good thing. I'm not going to lie. I do this all the time. When I hit that button and people started joining for today, I was nervous. So just know that it is something that everybody has, and it is a good thing. It means that you're invested in the outcomes, and it's energy that you can use to be your best. So don't think of it as a negative and a bad thing. Think of it as something to propel you to do better. The second thing I would tell you is many of us have like a physical response to nerves. Like for me, my heart will start beating really fast. Sometimes my face gets flushed and I get hot, and I feel like people can see that I'm like super red. Just know that those symptoms are very acute to you because you are in your body, but the other people in the room don't notice it as much as you do. So even if your voice shakes, a lot of times for a really big presentation, my voice will shake for the first couple of sentences, because, until I kind of get into a groove. People don't notice it. They really don't. So what you think is a total disaster, like people don't notice it as much as you do because you're in your body. So I think some of it is just knowing that it'll always be there and changing your mindset about what it is, not as a barrier, but as something that can give you energy. And then, understanding that, people do not see you as like this shaking, they don't see it the way you do because you're in your body. So changing how you think about it a little bit.
That is so amazing. What's your opinion on typical elements of a BS slide, and how has that influenced how you have leaned out your slides over the years?
Say it again, a BS slide?
Yes, in Q&A. What's your opinion on typical elements of a BS slide? I'm not saying the word right now. And how has that influenced how you've leaned out your slides over the years?
Yeah. So I believe, going back to the idea of distilling information, people feel like they need to put everything on the page, and that's a big mistake. So identifying like what are the key points, but not even that, like realize that they don't even need to be complete sentences. The PowerPoint slides are really just a way to facilitate and support the conversation that you're having. You need to be able to take that discussion wherever it should go. But like, there's definitely a deck fatigue. So it's like a love-hate relationship, right? I do believe there's a lot of value in having a slide deck because it legitimizes that you've thought through the idea. So I'm all for like off the cuff conversations to say like, hey, like, should we do this? Should we do that? But when you get your idea to a point where you're ready to say, hey, we need to move forward with this, you need to show people that you've thought it through. And one of the ways that you can demonstrate that, it's a signal that you've done that work. So to me, I feel like a lot of times people are like, oh, why do we have to keep doing these slides and blah, blah, blah. Not only that, people have way too much information thrown at them and they can't remember or retain this. So it also becomes then an artifact that they can refer to and remember at a later time. So I hate being a deck monkey as much as the next person, but I do see the value in it. And I think it's important to be able to put your ideas on a page so that people can understand them better. 60% of us are visual learners. So having that visual is important to people.
Yeah, because then the second part of James' question, also your opinion on how many discrete visual elements a person can track before slide turns into an eye chart. That happens so often, and I've gotten to the point when I see people come into the meeting and say, "Yeah, I know it's an eye chart, but this is what." So it's like people are understanding they turn this into an eye chart, and now they are expecting us to still follow it. So, any kind of words of guidance on that?
Yeah. So a couple of things. This is also in my course, Consensus Creator. So we talk a little bit about delivery and like some of the do's and don'ts of presenting. I'm just going to give an example. And I do think I should do like a specific series on visual display of data because that's such a big piece of what we do. And the truth is, in any chart, there's oftentimes a lot of information, but again, only a small portion of it that's relevant to the conversation. So I think you have to always be asking yourself, like, what specific data element is relevant to the topic at hand? And make sure that you're highlighting, you're making it easy for folks to see what that is. So it's okay to include for context, like a more complete data set, but find a way to really hone in on, okay, what is the actual data piece that is meaningful in this context? Oftentimes what I end up doing is instead of using the chart that I get back from the data analyst, I'm putting it into a much more simplified version that is really all about telling the story. Like I'm plugging and playing numbers versus pulling in the whole chart because it's too much and it's not relevant to the discussion. So I think really, again, thinking through like what is the small pieces of information that are actually relevant to what you're trying to do.
Yeah. Sophia's asking, how do you build relationships in a short time span? I meet new potential clients all the time. When they schedule an appointment on my website, then I show up at their house and I usually spend a few minutes talking about how they found me, and then I let them drive the conversation. So ultimately, how do you build relationships in a short time span?
Yeah. So I believe that I know that people enjoy sharing about themselves. So I feel like you're doing the right things when you say, I let them drive the conversation, because I'm just asking open-ended questions. To me, I feel like how you build relationships in a short time span is you demonstrate that you're truly interested in them and what they want and need. What are their pain points? I don't know exactly what your service is, but just by showing that you're honestly and truly interested in them is going to be the fastest way to build a relationship. Just being yourself as much as you can, and just a garden coach. Oh my gosh, I need you in my life, Sophia. I have such a brown thumb. I love that. I think, gosh, there's so much talk about authenticity and what what that is. I feel like it's an overused word and most people don't really know what it means, but I feel like, you know, being authentic, like just being who you are and then being curious
Yeah.
about the other person is such a fast path to building a connection with someone. And I think you've got it right in letting them drive the conversation, making it about them, not about your experience.
Yeah, that's for sure. I can definitely relate to that as well. I can do much better in influencing in organizations when I start to get to know people and just building that click. And it's also very difficult, however, with people who have different types of personalities. Obviously, we come from different sides, and like the introverts and the extroverts, and how do you? Some people it's hard to get your word in, but then the other folks it's hard to get them to speak. So, and that's a beautiful part of our relationship building as well, getting to know people, right?
Yeah, it is.
And ultimately, I think it's also for me, and I'm just kind of talking through this a little bit, just as I'm listening to what you're saying. Ultimately, even if you're sitting at work, it's still about relationships. When you get to know people, people do forget that just because you're in a work setting doesn't mean you don't want to get to. It's just a different context of how you're getting to know each other. It's not like you need to know. You even talk about when you went on vacation and all that good stuff, but you don't have to spill your guts and show entire history of your life or anything, but still there is something personal about that, right? So you have to, in order to do better at work. So
Yeah, and
it's
some
very
people
interesting.
don't really love going there and sharing their personal
Yeah.
stuff at work, but I always like to quote, many people are familiar with a big study that Google did called Project Aristotle, which was a study of the teams in Google to find which teams were the most effective and why were they effective. And so what they found was that the highest performing teams weren't necessarily the teams that were the most skilled, or even the teams that were co-located, or any of those things.
Yeah.
The best performing teams were the ones that had high psychological safety. And so one of the ideas that they pointed to in terms of how teams can create high psychological safety is to have higher empathy and like to know each other better. And that first 5 minutes of the meeting where you're just sort of BSing and like talking about your weekend, there are people that hate that more than anything, right? They just want to get to the thing and do the thing. But really that time is really important because it helps you to know the other person in a different way and be more in tune with what they might need even at work. So I very much believe in that. And I also believe we need to get better at sharing our feelings at work, which sounds crazy, but I do think there's emotion that happens in some of these scenarios. And so I think it's important for people to be able to say, hey, I am feeling this way because of that, like to be able to have those open conversations. And that makes some people uncomfortable, right? They think work should be very,
Yeah.
very unemotional. So
Yeah. Kristen has a good point. COVID is great for that, in my opinion. Genuinely checking in with people before you get into the task and agree, totally agree. There's one, you have such great reels and posts, and one of them that really I wanted to talk about was raising your voice versus improving argument. In discussions and debates and meetings, when you get into a situation when you are debating with somebody about a direction or something like that. I mean, I feel like, that's, your personal, sometimes I, for example, am a person when I am starting to get uncomfortable in a debate or an argument, I start to kind of like my voice starts to raise. And I just so empathize with that. And I feel like I so connect with that. So can you talk through how to handle that best, raising your voice versus improving your argument?
So I've never been a yeller at work. Um, Actually, a month or two ago, I yelled in a meeting and it like threw me
Oh,
off. And I ended the meeting early because I was like, clearly, I just need a moment. So to me, this again goes back to the idea that everyone has a different perspective. And so if the case that you're making isn't landing with the other person, there's a reason. And so what is it that that person is thinking or knowing that you don't think or know? And how can you get to that? So that's how you can improve your argument, is to understand, okay, what is their perspective around this? Why is that their perspective? And so when you go back to like high school debate class, I think a lot of people have had this experience where, you know, in debate, you should know what each side of the argument is. That's how you become a better debater, is you should be able to argue both sides of any scenario. So if you find yourself not being able to argue the other side, then you don't know that perspective well enough, and you need to ask open-ended questions to figure it out. And that's how you improve your argument. Because rarely escalating and yelling ever result in someone saying, oh, because you said it louder, clearly you must be right. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. So viewers, attendees, if you have any other last minute questions, let us know. We are going to be signing off soon. One more thing that I also deal with or struggle with sometimes in my experience or work, I'm dealing with people who don't work for me because I'm going and influencing most of the times, right? So interrupting people sometimes becomes important to really get your point across, because sometimes, as we know in these days, we go off in different tangents and one thing leads to another. How do you interrupt people, in particular people who are in authority, right, in meetings? What are some of the suggestions that you'd make on that?
Yeah, so if you are the host of the meeting, one of the most important things that you can do is make sure that there is a very clear meeting objective and time and time box for the meeting. So, you know, if you're the host of the meeting, your job, it's your job to make sure that the meeting happens in a timely way and that you achieve the objective of the meeting. And so when you have that objective, it makes it much easier to interrupt those people that are, if they are truly going on a tangent, but even when they're not. So if they're, let's just say in an example, you've got someone who has sort of taken over the meeting because they have some soapbox issue that they want to talk about, and everybody's had that experience. I will interrupt that person. Okay. And the way I do that, and even if it's someone that is much more senior than me, and I've done this pretty regularly, is I'll interrupt them by saying their name. I would say, Fez, I'm, you know, sorry to interrupt you. I just want to be sure that I understand, you know, what you're saying. And then I'll succinctly summarize the point that they're trying to make. And they'll say, yep, that, you know, that's it. And I'll say, that's a really important point. I am going to make a note of it so that I'm sure that we've got it captured. But we need to go back to our meeting objective so that we have enough time to discuss this item. So I acknowledge and validate that they have an important thing to share, right? So I'm not like trying to brush them off, but I'm trying to say, hey, this is the purpose of the meeting and we need to get back to it so that we have time. And that's usually pretty well received, right? Because and the next step is you do have to actually follow up if there's something to follow up on around the thing that person was talking about. And then the other scenario is just things are taking longer than you expected them to take, right? Like you'll get into a conversation and it's bigger than than you thought it would be. And for that, like basically you have to force the decision point. So you have to say, okay, we have 10 minutes left in this meeting. We can stay on this topic, but it means we won't get to this third topic that we had. Is everybody okay with that? Or, you know, the decision could be, hey, we're going to stop and we want to be sure that we get to this third topic. So we will. So, that's, I think, again, that's when you're sort of like and I sometimes jump into that role, even when I'm not the meeting organizer, because most meeting organizers don't do that. So I just take it over and do that. We need more people to do those things, right? To make sure that we're staying on task.
Yeah, that's fair. Last question. What are some good open-ended questions?
Tell me more about
that. Can be answered without the,
That is the bet. Tell me more about that. So oftentimes people will say something and it's not complete, right? Like you kind of get what they're trying to say, but maybe you don't know exactly, and you just need them to say more words. So I love, Brene Brown uses that. Oh, good. Yeah. Tell me more about that. And you know who else does? There's this great book by Kelly Corrigan called Tell Me More. But yeah, you know what I sometimes say too, which is kind of funny. I say more words about that. Like say more words, because really you need them to, and sometimes I'll say, if I'm not quite picking up, I'll say something like, can you say that differently? Can you use different words to say that? You know what I mean? Like, so sometimes it's like, I don't think I'm understanding that. Like, can you just say it a different way? Say more words. Yeah. So I think it's about just getting the person to talk more is a good open-ended question.
Yeah. For sure.
Yeah, and just making them feel comfortable that you're interested and you want to know more, right? I think sometimes people are like, they don't necessarily like, want to, some people are introverted and they don't want to be the loud voice of center of attention and things like that. So you have to try to make them comfortable that, yeah, you do actually want to know more about that and you're here to listen to their problem. So
I love what Nils just said. And then what?
Yeah.
And then what? So you just keep prodding and keep asking them to speak more. That's really awesome.
Or why, the 5 whys is another one that people talk about.
5 whys, I love that. Right.
You just keep asking why.
That's most underutilized practice.
Yes. How did that make you feel? I love that one too, Nils. So when I, and I use this a lot actually in personal scenarios, when I host a podcast called The Opposite of Small Talk. And it's kind of a joke because I understand the value of small talk, but I kind of hate it. Like I'd much rather have a deeper conversation with people about like ideas and things. So one of the tricks I use, if someone in my like social circle gives me like a very, benign statement like, oh, Johnny started school this week, started kindergarten, I'll say something like, oh, well, how are you feeling about that? And that's a much different question than like, oh, what teacher does he have? You know what I mean? So instead of saying at that surface level, it's going a little bit deeper. And I've used that at work as well. Like, how are you feeling about this project? That's a great question, right? Because that's very open-ended and people can take it wherever they want to take it. I love it.
Yeah, for sure. Wow, I can sit here and talk forever with you. So amazing, always. Every time we talk on the phone, it's just so energizing. Thank you so much for spending time with us. All the attendees wanted to thank you. Really appreciate you getting up and early in the morning, and especially folks in California, so early for coming and joining us. Really appreciate all the questions, comments, everything. And Christy, tell us a little bit again, one more time about your Instagram and how people can get in touch with you.
Yes, I just put it in the chat. So ko.communication is probably where I do the most content because I just love that format. But you can also, there's a link in my bio where you can find, I've got like a guide to relationship building, a little worksheet for how you prep for a meeting and like all kinds of free resources. So if you go on Instagram or on my website, christyollinger.com, there's like a whole page of free stuff that you could download just to about communication. So
thank you. Well, so thanks everybody. Again, my name is Faz Sayed. I'm a transformation coach. You can always follow us at LinkedIn, on Instagram at Noyobi. Appreciate everybody's time. Looking forward to actually getting to know all of you as well, because a lot of the attendees themselves do podcasts, and also I recognize a lot of the names. Thank you so much for joining. Looking forward to learning from you as well in our future sessions. And have a great rest of the Sunday. Christy, thanks again. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.